So hello everyone. This presentation is titled Basic Concepts in Political Science. And our objective here is to understand identify first of all, and understand what are those concepts that are very important in our discussion, of government, governance, and political science generally. How do we make sense of these concepts and how can we use them? Because of course we must understand them before we're able to use them. So that's what we're going to be trying to discover in this presentation. Now, just imagine a door that doesn't have hinges. That door can be very dangerous. It can be a weapon because it swings in uncontrollable directions. You can barely control such a door. That can be said also of trying to trying to hold conversations in social sciences without the proper understanding of concepts. One will be seen to be just talking perhaps out of context, not able to be understood, and almost making little or no sense at all. So concepts are very, very important, not just in social sciences, but I mean, in almost every other discipline, concepts are very important. And it's important that we understand concepts because without understanding them, like we said, it can be difficult for us to analyze issues, to recommend policies, to hold meaningful conversations, even with other individuals. So it's important that we understand concepts. They're very, very, very important. Um, and of course, concepts are more important, or concepts are important generally because of the meanings attached to them. Just imagine the concept of power, for instance. Of course, we all have various ideas or understandings of what power as a concept means. Now we're not talking about whether those understandings are right or wrong, but let's just assume that we didn't have meanings, or there were no meanings attached to the concept of power. It makes that concept completely useless and almost, non-existent, because concepts that don't have meanings are not useful. They're not usable. You can't use them because there's no meaning attached to them. And you find out that you only begin to use concepts as you understand the meanings of those concepts. That's when those concepts get get used in conversations. You use them in writing, speech, and what have you. So the meanings attached to concepts are what make them very, very important. And like other disciplines, political science has a set of concepts that are very, very central to the discipline. Some of them are concepts of power, authority, influence, legitimacy, and so on, which we're going to talk about in a little more detail as we progress. Now, power is a very highly controversial concept, particularly in social sciences, because we believe that power is multidimensional. We'll understand what that means as we progress. Power is a complex concept because it's very complex. It has a complex nature, and so all of these issues have made power a very, very controversial concept. Okay, there are various forms of power, or various ways that power manifests. It could be physical, it could be economic, it could be judicial, it could be spiritual. Of course, in Africa, we're not alien to the concept of spiritual powers. So power could also be spiritual. It could be political. It could be military. And the list could go on and on and on. These are various ways by which power manifests itself. And some people can also say that these manifestations can help profile certain meaning, certain understandings to the various dimensions of power, as we said earlier. All right. So the endeavor of political science, the discipline itself, has been completely devoted, among other things, to understanding the concept of power. You know, how do we make sense of this concept that is very controversial? How do we try to define it? How do we try to understand it? What are the various perspectives from which we can approach, this concept? That has been the objective, the aim of many textbook, many scholars in the political science field. And of course that debate has continued even up till today. Some of the very, very major or famous assertions about power include the fact that power among all the causes, this was said by Lord Action, saying among all the causes which degrade and demoralize man, power is the most active. But of course, power can also be a force to elevate and moralize. It can help to boost morale as well. Power is more like a double-edged sword kind of. But Lord Action intended to look at it or viewed it from a degrading, demoralizing perspective, which of course is not wrong, because that's an opinion as well. George Catlin says that what men seek most in their political negotiations is power. And I mean, even though George says that it is restricted to political negotiations, but we know that power is not restricted to political negotiations. Power is also involved in social negotiations, in religious negotiations, and what have you. Thomas Hobbes says that power is the present means to secure some future apparent good. So all of these are just some famous assertions that people have made about power, just to re-emphasize the importance, and the significance of this concept of power, how significant it is in the discipline of political science and government. All right. Now, what is power? How do we try to understand and define these concepts? It's important to first of all underscore the fact that there is no universal definition of many social science concepts, including the concept of power. There's no one size fits all definition, because people intend to approach concepts from their perspectives, and those perspectives are subjective as well. They're influenced by their upbringing, their past experiences, their ideologies about life, and so all of those things shape the perspectives that people have or hold about certain concepts, and those perspectives are what people express when they talk about the concept. So you hardly find any uniform concepts in social sciences, and that is one of the beauties of the discipline as well. But in trying to understand political power, as opposed to all the other manifestations we talked about, religious, spiritual, physical, military, economic, we must first of all understand what is political about power, what is the politics, in that phrase. All right. Of course, Aristotle was the one who described man as a political animal, and he went further to say that um, this means that man is always involved in a systemic interaction, you know, in relation to his environment and his fellow men. And one will wonder, why is this interaction systemic? It's systemic in the sense that in such interactions that man has with his fellow men or with environment, man wants to, consciously or unconsciously, man wants to dominate that interaction. Man wants to benefit, maximally from such an interaction, and so individuals would bring to bear as many resources as possible at their disposal to ensure that they maximally benefit from any kind of interaction they engage themselves in, and that is some kind of exercise of power, and that's why it is systematic, because everyone is calculating to ensure that they maximize their outcomes. All right. So bearing this in mind, we can describe political power as the ability to impose one's will on the behavior of others, the ability to modify or completely alter the behavior of others, you know, um, or social power that is exercised over men, not other, not over nature or other things. So political power is power that is exercised on over other people. It's not power over certain non-living things or certain aspects of nature. Political power is social power, so it must be exercised in relation to individuals. To individuals. All right. In summary, we can say that political power, is the ability of an actor, which we have in this case described as A, to get another actor, which we have described as B, to do what the other actor would otherwise not do. All right, so A and B are two actors in a political interaction. The ability of A to get B to do what B would under normal circumstances not do. That's what political power is, in summary. Okay, I'm sure this gives us an idea into what or how to understand the concept of political power. Now, there are certain major characteristics, or features of political power, which we're going to talk about in this slide. We have said that power is relational, is relative, and of course, it's multidimensional, which was one of the things we talked about in the beginning or in a few slides, in a few of the previous slides, where we said that this is one reason why the concept is controversial. All right, so what do we mean by power being relational? Power is relational in the sense that it has to be exercised, in an interaction that involves more than one person. All right, so you can't exercise political power over yourself. All right, you can't exercise political power, in isolation. It has to be exercised. There has to be at least two individuals involved for political power to be exercised. That's why we're saying it is relational. It must be exercised in relation to other individuals or other groups of individuals. All right, power is also relative. Okay, power is relative, and that's because the amount of power that you exercise when you are relating with actor A might be different from the kind of power you exercise when you're relating with actor B. So depending on the significance, depending on the magnitude, the capacity of the actors that are involved, power is exercised with caution. Political power is exercised with caution. So for instance, if there's a power relationship between the Nigerian state and the Republic of Togo, and Nigeria at the same time is also in a political interaction with Spain or France, you understand that the kind of political power that exists between Nigeria and Togo will be different from what exists between Nigeria and France or Spain, right? It's relative because of the actors involved. So that's what we mean by relativity of power. Power is exercised in consideration of the actors that are involved in that power relationship. All right, that's what we mean by relativity of power. And then the third characteristic is the fact that power is not monolithic. It's not unidimensional. So there are so many things that are involved in trying to calculate or trying to exercise political power. So many things are involved in trying to understand political power. All right, it is manifested on many fronts. It's manifested on many fronts, and so we understand these dimensions when we talk about the dimensions of power. We understand these manifestations. All right, but it's important to understand that power is not unidimensional. All right, it's not manifested on only one front. So there are so many fronts in which power can be seen to be exercised. Political power, specifically, there are so many points that it can be seen to be exercised. All right, and of course, it is not exercised on the same level at all these fronts. So, for instance, if Nigeria, using Nigeria and Togo as an example still, and then Nigeria and France, if Nigeria has political power or exercises political power over Togo's educational industry, over Togo's economic sector, over Togo's manufacturing sector, over Togo's power sector, those are four sectors that Nigeria exercises political power over Togo. All right, it might not be the same as the sectors in which Nigeria will exercise power over France, and vice versa. So the kinds of power that Nigeria exercises, if I over Togo as using those two countries as an example, the amount of power that Nigeria exercises over Togo's educational sector might be more than what it exercises over Togo's economic sector. All right. So Nigeria might have more power, might exercise more power over Togo's educational sector, and then not as much power over Togo's economic sector. So we're just saying that the exercise of power on the various fronts that power, can manifest varies. It varies, and that's why we say it is multidimensional. It's multidimensional. There are so many dimensions to power, which sometimes cannot be fully understood, and that's why the concept is very controversial. If you have questions about this, we can of course you can of course ask, and we can continue the conversation. But these are three major features or characteristics of political power as a concept. All right. There are also three types of political power, which of course have been argued by Anifoche and Enemo. And these types of power are force, manipulation, and domination. All right, force, manipulation, and domination. And with the exception of force, manipulation and domination, have are more like word and opposite. But of course, force involves the use of physical manipulation, threats, assault, confinement to get people to change their behavior or modify their behavior. So with force, you are influencing people's behavior using some form of threat, some form of punishment, physical assault, maybe to try and get them to adjust their behavior. In terms of domination, the power holder is explicit about what he wants done. So the command is clear. All right, the people who power is exercised over, they understand what they need, what needs to be done, what the command is very clear. Okay, and of course, they also understand what the consequences of their actions or what the consequences of their disobedience would be. So, for instance, if I'm a power holder, as an example, and I want to exercise political power over you, or if I want to exercise domination over you as a type of political power, you would understand clearly what instructions I intend you to implement. My instructions to you will be clearly understood. And of course, you also understand the consequences that are involved in you not complying with those actions. So you understand the instruction, you understand the consequences, of disobedience. And so it is your choice to choose whether to comply or not, knowing that disobedience or non-compliance would result in certain consequences. And of course, in most cases, you find out that people would naturally want to comply because of the fear of the consequences that are involved, with disobedience or that come with disobedience. So this is a little similar to authoritarian power because, of course, in an authoritarian regime, people understand that disrespect, disobedience, comes with very dire consequences. All right, but with manipulation, the instruction is not very clear, and that's why I said it's like word and opposite. So domination, the instruction is clear, consequences for disobedience are clear, but in manipulation, the instruction is not very clear, and of course the behavior is influenced by the power holder either engaging in those activities themselves, or using propaganda to get the follower to amend or adjust their behavior. All right. So, for instance, if I walk into a classroom and I see that the classroom is dirty, I might not say, you all get up, sweep the classroom, pick up the papers, and all of that. That's going to be domination, because not complying might mean that I'll get upset and all of that. If I say clearly what I expect you to do, that's domination. All right. But I might just begin to pick up the papers myself. And as time goes on, when I've picked maybe one, two, or three, or three papers or letters around the class, it is likely that more people would join me in picking up, without me asking them to pick up papers. It's likely that more people would join me in picking up. So that is the use of example to try and manipulate people to obedience. All right. I can also walk into the class and say, oh, and I start making comments that are, that tend to show that people who stay in dirty environments are not neat people, they don't have any sense of decency, and then just trying to talk to your conscience, without not necessarily telling you pick up the papers. All right. So with all of those remarks I'm making about people living in a dirty environment, being dirty, and not having a sense of decency, I'm exploiting propaganda to try and get you to pick up the papers from the class. All right. So in this sense, manipulation, is more subtle. It's more subtle, and as compared, or when in comparison to domination, it's more subtle. And of course, force is the most non-subtle. Force is more physical. It's more violent, as the case may be. So these are the three major types of political power, as proposed or as argued by Andy Fauché and Enemo. And of course, you can come across other types, in some other textbooks. But I think these three types capture the various types, or the various forms, ways in which power can be exercised. And I think they are very, very appropriate. Now, these are the dimensions of political power. We talked about the fact that power is multidimensional. All right, power is multidimensional in the fact that it can be exercised, or can be understood in these five dimensions. Number one is the scope of power. All right, the scope of power refers to the aspects of an actor's behavior that are affected by the power holder. All right, I made an example of Nigeria and Togo. All right, if Nigeria has power, if Nigeria is able to exercise power over four sectors of the Togolese national economy, maybe the educational sector, the manufacturing sector, the religious sector, perhaps the energy sector. Nigeria is able to exercise power over these four sectors. All right, it means that Nigeria has a certain scope of power when it comes to its interaction with Togo. But that may not be the same as Nigeria's interaction with France. With France, Nigeria might just be able to exercise influence over its economic sector, and that might be the kind of power it exercises might not be very significant, because of course of the kinds of export that Nigeria does, maybe crude oil to France or things like that. Okay, so it means that the scope of Nigeria's power over Togo is more than the scope of Nigeria's power over France. So the scope of power is measured in terms of how many aspects of the other actor's behavior is the power holder able to influence. All right, the more the aspects of behavior, the wider the scope. The less the aspects of behavior, the smaller the scope. All right, now the second manifestation is the domain of power. All right, and the domain of power refers to the number of actors that are subject to the influence of the power holder. All right, how many actors does the power holder have control over? Okay, on the African continent, the Nigerian state is seen to have a wider domain of power because of its size, because of its history, its efforts in peacekeeping across the continent. So Nigeria is seen as a big brother, and it's able to exercise power over more African states as compared to other countries like Benin Republic or Mali or Chad, which do not have the features or characteristics, or attributes that Nigeria has in terms of history, in terms of diplomatic efforts, and so on and so forth. So in comparison with Chad, for instance, or Niger Republic, Nigeria has a wider domain, of influence on the African continent in comparison with all of these countries I've mentioned earlier. So how big is the power holder? How big is the power holder? And how many actors does the power holder have influence over? That determines the domain of influence, the domain of power. The weight of power is determined in probability. So it is calculated in percentage. What is the likelihood of A exercising influence over B? All right. Is there a higher probability that A is able to affect B's behavior? Is there a lower probability that A is able to affect B's behavior? And determining the probability also depends on various issues like the size of A, the 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 method A wants to use in exercising such influence, and so many other things that might be involved. But to what extent is it possible that that's what we mean by the weight? The weight of power is determined by probability. So there's no certainty about the weight. What is the possibility that A is able to exercise power over B, or that B is able to respond to the influences coming from A? All right. Remember, A and B, we're using them as examples, or we're using them to connote actors involved in a relationship, in a political relationship. All right. So the higher the probability, the higher the weight. The lower the probability, the lower the weight. In terms of cost, cost is measured. Cost is measured by how costly or how cheap it is. On both sides of the relationship. So for instance, the power holder, how costly is it for the power holder to issue a command or a direction or an instruction to B, the actor that is about to be influenced? Is it costly? Does A have to spend much money to affect B's behavior? Does B have to spend much money in complying with A's instruction or command or directions? So the higher the cost, the lower the power. The lower the cost, the higher the power. So for instance, if Nigeria has to spend so much money to get Togo to influence the behavior of Togo, then it means that Nigeria doesn't have as much power over Togo as as it claims. And that is going to be even more true if Togo doesn't spend so much to comply with Nigeria's instructions. All right. But if Nigeria is spending little and Togo is spending so much to comply with Nigeria's instruction, then it means that Nigeria has sufficient power over Togo in terms of cost. All right. So cost is also another very important dimension of power. There are certain times that it costs you very much to influence the actions of others. You can see what goes on in the international space, international relations, in terms of China, the US, and the trade wars, North Korea, the nuclear wars that go on, nuclear disagreements, not wars per se, nuclear disagreements that go on between these countries, and trade disagreements. You see how much it costs one or two other countries, one or more of these countries, to get the other country to budge or to succumb to certain pressure. So sometimes the costs can be high, sometimes the costs can be low. That's why power is also is complex, because you really cannot quantify all of these. You cannot quantify all these dimensions all at once. And so it's difficult for you to say for sure that this is how much power a certain state has. That's why power is very, very controversial. And finally, the means of power is also another dimension. How, what is the method of exercising power? Is it symbolic, using communicative action, either the media or, whether it's print or social media, or dialogue, whatever other communicative action that could be used, or rallies, protests, those are what we refer to as symbolic means of exercising power. Or does it have to be economic means, trying to give trade sanctions, or trying to influence the economy of a state using either export or import or whatever it's other trade economic dynamics that could be involved. Is it military? Is it diplomatic? So all of these are means by which power can be exercised. Political power, particularly, can be exercised. And what we are saying is that for an individual to be able to calculate all these dimensions and then say that A has this amount of political power is almost impossible. And so that is one reason why the concept of power has remained a mystery, because it's difficult to calculate in totality how much power a certain state or actor has or exercises over other actors or other states, as the case may be. All right. Now, the concept of authority is another concept that is also very important in social sciences, and particularly political science. Power, of course, might not it's not recognized. So power can be exercised. Power can be exercised arbitrarily. In fact, there's a popular saying that absolute power corrupts absolutely. And so when an individual or a state possesses power that is not controlled, then such a power has potential for abuse. All right. So authority is a slightly different concept from power. Authority is a kind of power that is exercised based on recognition. All right. And is accepted within a society. So authority is more or less recognized and accepted power. It's different from a power that is not recognized or that is not accepted. Okay, authority is recognized and accepted power. Everyone, can exercise power over other individuals, but only a few authorized, recognized individuals can exercise authority. And that's why there's a government. That's why there are individuals who are in government. They are recognized. They have earned the right to command other people to do certain things, to behave in certain ways. They have earned that right, and so they are accepted by other people in the society. So essentially, we say that authority is power that is clothed with legitimacy. We'll talk about legitimacy in a bit, but of course, power that is recognized, accepted, that is legitimate, is referred to as authority. And it's important to also mention that authority is different from authoritarian. A government with authority is different from an authoritarian government. There are two concepts that are different. A government with authority is a government that has been recognized, that is accepted, that is allowed to influence the behavior of other people legally, right? While an authoritarian government is one that basically compels people to do stuff. It's not accepted. It's not recognized, and of course, it breeds so much animosity and tension within the system. So they are different. They're different concepts, and they're different concepts. So this table kind of tries to explain some of the differences between power and authority. Number one says that power is not recognized, it's not accepted. Authority is recognized as ideal. Power is not validated by any means, whether the people or the media or international system. There's no validation for power. And that's why when the military takes over power, everybody frowns at it. It's not validated at all. The people are not happy. But authority is validated. The people go to elections, they vote, they put in somebody there to represent them. Power, the major response to power is opposition. Everybody is angry. Everybody is fighting back. Whereas response to authority is more of acceptance, of tolerance. Even when things get hard, you are tolerating, like we are doing the Buhari regime, because we elected them, so we are tolerating. Power, the resistance to power, is lawful. So if you resist power, if somebody barges into your house at night, with certain kinds of weapons to exercise power over you, and somehow you're able to knock the person out, inflict some bodily harm on the person, you have not done any crime. You have not committed any crime under the law. So opposition to power is legal, all right? But opposition to authority is not lawful. It's not lawful. Power is more or less naked. We said authority is clothed with legitimacy, and then all the other issues, differences, that you see there as well. Legitimacy is another concept, and like we said, legitimacy, is the acceptance that clothes power and makes it more acceptable, more legal, more constitutional. All right. Here we have referred to it as a tool for carrying out the responsibility of government, of governance rather. You can imagine a government that is not accepted. I mean, that government is more or less good for nothing. They will not be able to achieve anything. They will not be able to get the support of the people because it's not recognized, it's not accepted, you know, by the people. So legitimacy is an important tool for efficient governance. If a government has to be efficient and effective, the people must accept it. The people must recognize it as legal, as as appropriate. So basically, legitimacy is a key ingredient that separates power and influence, from authority. We'll talk about influence in a bit, but influence is synonymous with power, and we'll see how that plays out in a couple of minutes. But legitimacy, like we said, is is makes power more acceptable, makes power more recognized, and there are there are three sources of legitimacy. There are three sources by which individuals or authorities are able to get that acceptance, that recognition, that helps them to exercise power that is accepted by everybody or that is recognized by other people. And those three sources, which are also types of authority, are traditional, legal or rational, and of course charismatic. Traditional in the sense that one of the sources of legitimacy is custom, culture. You know, of course, when people understand the culture of the land and they understand that a son is supposed to take over from his father, who is a king, then it means that that son, the prince, the son of the king, it doesn't have to fight for what is his because the culture already says that this is what happens, and people understand that culture. So that culture gives that son the acceptance, the legitimacy to exercise power over the people, or whatever that custom or culture there is that delivers such legitimacy. So culture is one of the sources of legitimacy, and it is a type also of authority that individuals exercise over others. The law is another source, um, and of course this could either be judicial or administrative. Judicial in the sense that people are elected. We went to the ballot, we casted our votes, and elected certain people to represent us. So they have legitimacy by law. All right. Others, excuse me. Others are administratively appointed. All right. And of course, by appointment, they have that legitimacy to rule over us, like cost reps, head of departments. They're appointed by a higher authority, or even by the individuals involved as well. So, in most cases, legitimacy or legal authority can be acquired either by law, by elections, or by appointment. And that is also a type of authority that people exercise over others. And then the last one is charismatic. Authority can be charismatic, or legitimacy can be gotten, based on certain very unique characteristics that individuals possess that are not present in everyone else. So charismatic authority it's not very common because not every individual is charismatic. All right, so it's difficult to find and replace charismatic individuals, and so charismatic authority, essentially anyway, is a kind of authority or legitimacy that is gotten, as a result of certain qualifications or qualities that are unique to certain individuals. All right. Now, influence. We said influence is a very is a very related concept with power, and that's because both power and influence intend to alter the behavior of others. Intends to alter the behavior of others. Influence basically is defined by Robert Dahl as a relation where the wants, desires, preferences of one actor affects the actions of the other actor. So two individuals are involved in an interaction, and of course, the desires of one actor, the wants, preferences of one actor influences the actions of the other actor. How it does, of course, also involves some kind of systematic implementation or systematic behaviors. You know, so how does one individual get the other one influence another individual to begin to display or accomplish their own wants and perspective, preferences, and desires? That's what influence is. And even though it is more subtle, but it accomplishes the same results as power as well. So influence and power are similar, because they have the same features. Influence is also relational because you cannot exercise influence in isolation. You have to influence someone else. You cannot influence inanimate objects. You cannot influence a book or influence a paper or a biro. You have to influence people who are living. So it has to be relational. All right. Influence is also relative, because it depends on who are involved in such an interaction. And then influence is also multidimensional. So you see, influence and power possess the same characteristics, and that's why it appears that they are a lot similar. All right. But of course, influence also differs from power in the sense that influence, influence does not resort to any kind of implicit or explicit threat. Of course, power. We said that one of the types of power is force, right? It's manipulation or domination, rather. You have to clearly state the command. You have to use physical force sometimes to achieve power. But in terms of influence, or in terms of influence, there's no such implicit or explicit threat, to influence other people's behavior. You just exercise that influence very subtly, and sometimes it is not even it is done unconsciously. It's done unconsciously. So reliable and coercive influence are two types of influences. Influence can either be reliable or coercive, and the reliable influence is based on reliable influence is based on legitimacy. There's an error in that particular slide, in that particular bullet, the last bullet there. There's an error. A reliable influence is based on legitimacy, whereas coercive influence is based on threat and the threat of severe consequences. All right, so it's supposed to be the other way around. Reliable influence is legitimate. It's more legitimate. It's more it's more accepted. Just like we said that authority is a more accepted, recognized type of power as opposed to power. All right. So reliable influence is legitimate, but coercive influence deals with threat of force or use of severe consequences. If excuse me, if the actor or if the actors involved are not complying with the instructions that are given. So those are two types of influences that exist: reliable influence and then coercive influence. All right. Now, the last concept we're going to define, which of course is by no means the least, is sovereignty. And sovereignty here refers to a final legal authority that a state or an individual has. In fact, in very clear terms, this refers to states most of the time. All right. So the final authority a state has to influence the behavior of people within its territory without interference from outside. That's what sovereignty is. and sovereignty can either be internal or external. Sovereignty can people interference can try to come from within. you know so the control within the territory of a state, that's what internal sovereignty is. The ability of a state to control the behavior of people within it without any kind of internal interference from either groups, or rebel groups or warring factions or you know um, any other groups or organizations that want to compromise the authority of the state, the internal authority of the state. And of course, sovereignty can also be external. Freedom from any kind of external interference, be it from states or terrorist groups or other international multilateral actors, as the case may be. So, internal, external sovereignty are two dimensions to sovereignty. All right. Whereas the types of sovereignty can either be legal sovereignty, means that there's absolute legal power of the state, to exercise influence over any parts of such a state, over any individuals or organizations within that state. It could be political, whereby the political process is supreme. All right, the people have the power. The people have the actual power. They can vote in a government. They can vote out a government if the government is not delivering the terms that are the terms of service or the terms of governance. Sovereignty can also be popular, where the masses, deserve the right, just like I said, the masses deserve the right, to influence the state. The influence of the masses is significant, and they have the right to demand certain actions or policies, reactions from government as at when due. Sovereignty can be de jure or de facto. De jure sovereignty is more constitutional sovereignty, while de facto is unconstitutional. It's more temporary. It's a makeshift kind of sovereignty, de facto, right? But de jure is constitutional, it's legal, it's accepted, and it's based on law. All right. So those are the types or those are the concepts that we're going to be talking about. We'll be using more often as we progress, and it's important that we understand what these concepts mean, broadly speaking. All right. In conclusion, we've said that concepts are crucial. Concepts are important for us to understand, to explain, to discuss, issues that are important. All right, and it's important for us to also have the correct understanding of these concepts, because misunderstanding concepts can lead to an entirely different direction of discussions or dialogue. All right, we've talked about some of the key concepts and the fact that power is the most significant. If we're to use that word, power is the most significant. Power is the most controversial, and we've talked about the reasons why: the multidimensional nature of power, the complex, nature of power, the fact that it is difficult to measure, it's difficult to quantify power, as opposed to economic power. Economic power can be quantified using bank accounts. Account statements. You can use account statements to know the economic power of an individual or of an organization. You just need to get their bank statements and see how much they have in their accounts, how much is their net worth, and then you know what the economic power is. But political power, is a lot difficult to calculate. It's a lot more complex to calculate. All right, and so political power, like we said, has remained the task of political science to understand, and make sense of it. And as we progress, we'll be using more of these concepts. So it's important that we understand them. It's important that we um, that we that we try to know how the explanations of these concepts have been, what the various authors have said about these concepts, and how we can make use of them, in our own conversations, in our own interactions, and of course, in our own ways of trying to understand government, governance, and political science generally. All right, so this is the end of the presentation. If you have questions, if you have comments, if you have concerns on areas that you don't really understand, Of course, we can continue the conversation after here. Thank you for your attention.